The last time my daughter called on my birthday, my husband, Kenneth, was still alive to hand me the phone. I thought about that at 10 minutes past midnight, sitting alone at my kitchen table in Sudbury, the kind of quiet that only happens when snow falls and the whole street goes still. There was a small cake on the counter. Lemon, my favorite. I had bought it myself that afternoon from the bakery on Elgin Street, the one Kenneth and I used to walk to on Sunday mornings. I had even put a single candle in it. I hadn't lit it. My phone had been face up on the table since 6 o'clock. My daughter Noelle had not called. She had, however, sent a text at 8:43. "Hey, Mom, crazy week. Talk soon." So, 3 words and an X. That was my 63rd birthday. I want to be fair. Noelle is not a cruel person. She never was. She was a sharp, busy woman who had built a life in Vancouver with her husband, Dennis Hartley, and that life did not leave much room for Sudbury. I understood that, or I told myself I did. But understanding something and accepting it are 2 different things. And that night, sitting alone with an unlit candle and a cake I had bought for myself, I realized I had been pretending to accept something for years. I blew out a candle I never lit. That felt about right. I didn't sleep much. I lay in the bed Kenneth and I had shared for 31 years and stared at the ceiling, and I did what I always do when I can't sleep. I started a list. Not a list of grievances. Just facts arranged honestly. Noelle had forgotten my birthday last year, too. She called 3 days later, full of apologies and reasons. I told her not to worry about it. The year before that she had remembered, but only because Dennis had apparently reminded her. I knew this, because she said, in the middle of wishing me happy birthday, "Dennis just reminded me." She didn't seem to realize what that sounded like. And now this. The 3rd year in a row. A text at 8:43. By the time dawn came through the curtains, I had reached the end of the list, and at the bottom, I had written nothing, but I had thought something that I hadn't been willing to think before. My daughter is waiting for me to get smaller. I didn't know what to do with that thought yet. So I got up, put the kettle on, and ate the lemon cake for breakfast. It was very good. That felt like a small act of defiance, though I wasn't sure against what. The weeks after my birthday moved slowly. November in Sudbury does that. The light goes early and stays gone. I found myself doing things I hadn't done in years, or rather, I found myself avoiding them. I'd walk past Kenneth's old study and keep walking. I'd open the front closet and see his coat still hanging there, 4 years later, and close it again. There were parts of my life I had put into a kind of storage, not because I was ready to, but because no one had given me permission to move them. I know how that sounds. I'm 63 years old. I don't need permission. But grief does strange things to a person's sense of authority over their own life. Nah. Somewhere along the way, I had started waiting for something. For the right season, for the right moment, before I allowed myself to do anything that looked like moving on. Noelle called on a Tuesday, 12 days after my birthday. I was at the kitchen table paying bills. Her name came up on the screen, and I felt something complicated. Love and wariness arriving at the same time, the way they often do with people we know too well. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was bright, efficient. The voice she used when she had something on her agenda. We talked about the weather, about her work. She was a project manager at a tech firm, always mid-crisis, about the new deck she and Dennis were building at their house in Kitsilano. Then she cleared her throat. "Actually, Mom, I've been thinking. You know the cottage." The cottage. Kenneth's family cottage on Ramsey Lake. The place where he had proposed to me, where Noelle had learned to swim, where we had spent every August for 28 years. What about it? Well, it's just sitting there. You never use it in the winter, and the maintenance costs. I know what the maintenance costs are, Noelle. A short silence. Right. I just meant. Dennis and I were talking, and we thought it might make sense to look at the property values up there. They've gone up a lot. There it was. Not a conversation. A transaction. I told her I'd think about it. We hung up. I sat very still for a moment, then I went and got the kettle, and made another cup of tea, and stood at the kitchen window and watched a squirrel do something very determined with a pine cone. Kenneth would have laughed. He always laughed at squirrels. Said they were the most optimistic creatures on earth. I had not laughed at anything in a very long time. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention differently. I went back through the last few years in my memory, not with bitterness, just with clarity. The way you look at an old photograph and finally notice what's in the background. There was the Christmas 2 years ago when Noelle and Dennis drove up from the airport without stopping at the house first. They went directly to Dennis's parents in Chelmsford and came to me for 3 hours on Boxing Day. I had cooked for 2 days. There was the summer I had a minor surgery, a procedure on my knee, nothing serious. Noelle sent flowers. She did not come. She did send flowers. I kept telling myself that mattered. There was last spring when I mentioned, casually, that I was thinking about taking a watercolor class at the community center. Noelle had laughed. Not unkindly, just distractedly, and said, "Oh, Mom, that's sweet. Sweet." Like I was a child who had said something charming and impractical. I had not signed up for the class. I drove out to the cemetery on a Saturday in late November. The graves were dusted with the first real snow of the season. Kenneth's headstone was simple, his name, his dates, and below that, the line we had chosen together years before he died, because that was the kind of man he was. He made room for everyone. I stood there a long time. "She forgot again," I said. I wasn't embarrassed to talk to him there. I'd been doing it for 4 years. The wind moved through the birch trees at the edge of the cemetery. I took that as a response. "I know," I said. "I know I keep making excuses." I stood there until my feet were cold. Then I said one more thing quietly, to no one and to him at the same time. "I think I've been making myself very easy to forget." I drove home. I made soup. And that evening, for the first time in probably 2 years, I opened Kenneth's study. It smelled like him still, faintly. Cedar and old paper and something I had never been able to name. His desk was as he'd left it mostly, his reading glasses in their case. A coffee mug I'd bought him from a trip to Cape Breton that he'd used as a pen holder. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I told myself I was just looking. Sometimes you just need to be in a room where someone used to be. I opened the top desk drawer, pens, a pocket calendar from 2019, a roll of stamps. The second drawer held files, insurance papers, tax returns going back 15 years, warranties for appliances we no longer owned. It was in the third drawer that I found it, a manila envelope sealed. My name on the front in Kenneth's handwriting, Marion, just that. No date, no other marking. I sat down in his chair. I held the envelope for a long time without opening it. The house was completely quiet. Outside, snow was beginning again. Then I opened it. There was a letter inside, handwritten, several pages, on the cream stationery he used for personal correspondence. His handwriting was very even, very careful. He had been a patient man. "My darling Marion, if you're reading this, then I've been gone long enough for you to finally clean out my desk. Knowing you, that means it's been at least 3 years. I laughed. Then I cried. Then I kept reading. "I want to tell you something I should have said more clearly when I was still sitting across from you at breakfast. You have spent your whole life making sure other people had enough space, enough love, enough support, enough of you. You have given yourself away in pieces so many times that I think you may have lost track of what's still yours." I had to put the letter down for a moment. "I also need to tell you something practical." I picked it back up. "When the business sold, in 2017, I invested a portion of the proceeds in a separate account. I did this quietly because I wanted it to be yours, completely and without discussion. The account is held through a financial advisor named Bernard Quigley, at Quigley & Associates in Sudbury. His number is below. He's been expecting your call for some time." My heart was doing something strange. "The account has been growing. I'm not certain how much it will be by the time you read this. Enough to matter. Enough to let you make choices." I read the last page 3 times. "Marion, please don't spend the rest of your life waiting to take up space. You have always been the most interesting persons in every room. You just had a habit of standing near the door. Don't stand near the door anymore. All my love, always." Kenneth. I sat in his chair until the study was dark. I did not turn on the light. I just sat there, with his letter on the desk in front of me, and thought about all the things I had been putting off until some unspecified later. The next morning, I called Bernard Quigley. He answered on the second ring. When I told him my name, there was a pause, and then he said warmly, "Mrs. Calder, I've been hoping you'd call. We met that Thursday." Bernard Quigley was a tidy, serious man in his late 60s, with the manner of someone who dealt in trust for a living. He spent an hour walking me through documents. By the time I left his office, I was walking differently. I noticed it on the way to my car. My shoulders were back. I was looking up. The account was substantial. Not extravagant, not life-altering in any dramatic sense, but enough. Enough to travel. Enough to make choices without anxiety. Enough to do, as Kenneth had put it, what I actually wanted. And Noelle had no idea it existed. Her understanding of my finances was limited to what she had seen: the house, the cottage, the modest savings account, the pension. She had made calculations based on those numbers. She had made plans, or something like plans, based on those numbers. None of those plans included this. For the first time in months, I smiled on my drive home. Not because I wanted to keep secrets, because I had just realized something. I still had choices, real ones, and they were entirely mine. I did not tell anyone about the account. Not my friend Patricia. No, not Patricia. My friend Elspeth, who I'd known since our daughters were in the same kindergarten class at the school on Notre Dame, the one who could keep a secret and whose advice I trusted more than almost anyone's. I didn't even tell Elspeth yet. Not because I didn't trust her. Because I needed a little time to sit with the knowledge privately, to turn it over and feel the weight of it. For the first 2 weeks, I simply did small things. I called the community center and registered for the watercolor class. The next session started in January. I paid the registration fee and then sat for a moment with the confirmation email on my screen, waiting for the guilt to arrive. It didn't. Then I booked a trip. Kenneth and I had always talked about the Cabot Trail in autumn. We'd said, every year, next year. Then he got sick, and then he was gone, and next year became a word that didn't mean anything anymore. I looked at the calendar. October was months away. But there was a spring package 5 days. A small inn in Ingonish, guided walks, whale watching. I sat with my cursor over the confirm button for probably 90 seconds. Then I clicked. I felt 2 things at once: joy and an absurd, reflexive shame, as though spending money on myself required justification. I called Elspeth that afternoon and told her over tea, though she was in Brampton and we drank our tea on video. Elspeth was the kind of woman who wore bright scarves and had opinions and did not soften them unnecessarily. She looked at me through the screen and said, Marion called her. It took you long enough. You don't think it's— finish that sentence carefully. I laughed. Selfish? She set down her mug. Let me ask you something. When Dennis buys a new truck, and I assume he does, men like Dennis always have a truck. Does he call you and ask if it's all right? Of course not. And when Noelle decides to renovate her kitchen, Elspeth. Does she ask your permission? I didn't answer because the answer was obvious. Elspeth pointed at me through the screen. You have spent your life giving other people permission to live their lives. Nobody is waiting to give you the same permission. You have to give it to yourself. I thought about those words all evening. The next morning I bought a proper watercolor set. Not the inexpensive starter kit I'd been planning on, but a real one, with a good range of colors and 3 different brush sizes. I stood at the art supply counter on Durham Street, feeling slightly ridiculous, like a woman who had made a sudden and reckless decision. Then I remembered what Kenneth had written. Don't stand near the door anymore. I bought the brushes. A week later, my phone rang. Noelle. I noticed, not for the first time, that her calls tended to arrive after any movement in my accounts. I had never mentioned this pattern to her. I had barely admitted it to myself. Hi, sweetheart. Mom, hi, how are you? Good. I signed up for a watercolor class. A small pause. Oh, that's nice. I think so too. Listen, she said, shifting. I saw that you transferred some money last week. I closed my eyes briefly. Not in anger. In recognition. Did you? I still have access to the joint account from when Dad. I know, Noelle. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. I almost said, are you asking because you're concerned, or because you want to know what I'm spending? But I didn't. I said, I'm perfectly okay. I booked a trip. A longer pause. A trip where? Cape Breton. By yourself? Yes. The silence that followed felt very full. Noelle was not accustomed to me making plans without consulting her, or at minimum reporting them. I had trained her to expect a certain version of me. The version that checked in, explained herself, waited. That sounds expensive, she said finally. It's manageable. Mom, Noelle. My voice stayed even. I'm going to Cape Breton in the spring. I'll send you a postcard. We ended the call shortly after. I sat in the kitchen for a moment, noticing the absence of guilt. It surprised me. I was not doing anything wrong. I was booking a trip. I was taking a class. I was spending my own money on my own life at 63 years old, which was not particularly old at all. The realization arrived slowly, like a light coming up. I had been acting like a woman on her way out. Winding down, taking less, needing less, making herself smaller and more convenient, and somewhere along the way, Noelle had started to expect that. Had started, perhaps, to count on it. That December, Noelle and Dennis came to Sudbury for the holidays. It was the first time in 2 years they had made the trip. I noticed the timing. They arrived on the 23rd. Dennis Hartley was a compact, confident man who spoke in the language of returns on investment and market conditions, and who had always treated me with the specific politeness of someone who found me mildly irrelevant. He shook my hand at the door. He always shook my hand. Noelle hugged me properly. Whatever was complicated between us, she was still my daughter, and I still felt relief when I saw her face. The first day was pleasant. We cooked together. We talked about small things. Her work, an old friend of hers who'd just had twins, the new restaurant that had opened downtown. Dennis fixed a hinge on the back door that I'd been ignoring for a year. I thanked him sincerely. Then on the 24th, over breakfast, Dennis set down his coffee and said, "So Marion, we've actually been wanting to talk to you about the cottage situation." I looked up. Noelle was very focused on her toast. "The thing is," Dennis continued, "property values on Ramsey Lake are really moving. It would be worth a lot right now. More than it will be in a few years, probably, given the market." I looked at my daughter. She didn't meet my eyes. "And honestly," Dennis went on, "it's a lot of upkeep for one person. What do you actually use it for these days?" The question landed the way he probably intended it to. Practical, reasonable, unanswerable. What did I use it for? I went in the summer. I sat on the dock. I watched the water. I thought about Kenneth. Memories, mostly, I said. Dennis nodded the way people nod when they're waiting for you to finish. "Right, and those don't go away when the property changes hands." I looked at Noelle. "Is this what you came for?" She finally looked at me. Something moved across her face. Discomfort, maybe guilt, maybe genuine love trying to push through the surface of a conversation that had gone the wrong direction. "No, Mom, no. We just wanted to talk about the future." "Whose future?" The kitchen went quiet. Dennis cleared his throat. Noelle put down her toast. For a moment nobody said anything, and the question just sat there on the table between us. I didn't answer it. Instead, I got up, put the kettle on, and asked who wanted more tea. They left on the 27th. The house felt very quiet when they drove away. Not empty. Just quiet. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the realization that I had spent 2 days managing a dynamic instead of enjoying Christmas. Managing their comfort, their expectations, the careful architecture of not quite honesty that we had all agreed to maintain. I thought about something Elspeth had said. People learn what they can expect from us. We teach them over time without meaning to. I had been a very good teacher, and I had taught the wrong lesson. In January, I started the watercolor class. There were 9 people in it, ranging in age from 30 to one woman, who told us on the first evening that she had just turned 79, which she delivered like a small victory, which I suppose it was. The instructor was a woman named Petra, who had the focused calm of someone who spent a lot of time looking carefully at things. She told us on the first night that watercolor was the most honest of all the painting mediums because you could not hide your decisions. Every mark showed. You had to commit. I thought about that on the drive home. In February, my granddaughter called. Noelle's daughter, Wren, who was 17 and in her last year of high school and had her mother's sharpness and none of her tendency to edit herself before speaking. "Grandma, happy late birthday." She said it the moment I picked up without preamble. I sat down. "Wren, my birthday was in November. I know. Mom told me not to bring it up. I'm bringing it up." There was a silence. Why did she say that? Because she felt bad. A pause. She should feel bad. She forgot you 2 years in a row and then sent a text. "That's kind of awful, Grandma." I didn't say anything for a moment. I was not accustomed to someone just stating things plainly, without negotiation. "It's all right," I said automatically. "You don't actually think that." Wren's voice was not unkind, just accurate. "I can tell when you're saying what you're supposed to say. You sound like your grandfather." She went quiet. Then, softly, "I wish I'd known him longer." "Me too, sweetheart." We talked for nearly an hour. About her applications to university. She was hoping for Dalhousie, which pleased me enormously. Nova Scotia was a good choice. About a photography project she was working on for school. about nothing important. It was the best conversation I'd had in weeks, maybe months. When we were about to hang up, she said, "Grandma, can I tell you something weird?" Always. I overheard Mom and Dad talking about the cottage and how much it could sell for. A pause. It felt strange, like they were talking about something that wasn't theirs yet. The word yet hung in the air. "Thank you for telling me," I said carefully. "Are you okay?" "I'm going to Cape Breton in the spring." She laughed, surprised. Really? That's awesome, Miss Grandma." And she sounded like she meant it completely. I sat with her words for a long time after we hung up. The word yet. Not ever. Not someday. Yet. As though an outcome had already been agreed upon. The next morning I called Bernard Quigley. We spent an hour reviewing my options. Then I called Rachel Omatosho, the solicitor who had handled Kenneth's estate. A careful, intelligent woman who had advised me twice before and whom I trusted without reservation. She listened to everything. Then she said, "Marion, you have complete authority over every decision here. I want to make sure you understand that clearly." "I'm beginning to," I said. "Good. What would you like to do?" I had thought about it carefully. I was not interested in revenge. I was not interested in punishment. Those were the choices of someone who wanted to make another person feel something. What I wanted was simply the truth, to live it, and eventually, if necessary, to say it. "I'd like to make sure my affairs are in order," I said. "Properly. All of it. Then let's start there." Spring arrived in Sudbury the way it always does, reluctantly, with several false starts and one last defiant snowfall in late April. By the time I drove to the airport in May, the lilacs along my street were finally blooming. I had bought new luggage. Green, a deep forest green, because I had always bought sensible, neutral luggage before, and it had never once made me happy. I had also, over the preceding weeks, enrolled in a second watercolor session, begun a twice-weekly walk along the Ramsey Lake Trail, made 2 donations to organizations Kenneth had believed in, and had a very long overdue conversation with myself about what I actually wanted the next chapter of my life to look like. Noelle called 3 days before my departure. The call, as always, circled. Work, the weather, Ren's university applications. Then, I noticed there were some transactions on the account recently. That's right. Quite a few. A pause. "Mom, is everything okay? Are you? I just want to make sure you're not being impulsive about things." I set down my tea. "Impulsive? I just mean big decisions, when you're on your own." "Noelle," I kept my voice entirely calm. "I booked a trip to Cape Breton. I bought art supplies. I made some charitable contributions. I bought new luggage. That's a lot. For you or for me?" Silence. "I'm asking honestly," I said, "because I'd like to understand whose threshold I've crossed." Another silence. Longer. "Mom, that's not fair. When was the last time you called just to ask if I was happy?" Nothing. Not whether I'd made any decisions. Not whether the cottage was sitting empty. Not whether the pension was covering things. I paused. "When did you last call to ask if I was okay?" The silence that followed was the most honest thing that had passed between us in probably 3 years. Finally, Noelle said, very quietly, "I don't know." "Neither do I said. "That's worth thinking about." We said goodbye carefully. When the call ended, I didn't feel righteous. I felt sad and clear, the way you feel after a conversation that needed to happen. Cape Breton was extraordinary. I am not a person who uses that word lightly. I have been in this world for 63 years and I have learned to be careful with superlatives. But I stood on the shore at Ingonish on the second morning, with the Atlantic in front of me and the Cape Breton highlands above me and a cold wind coming in off the water, and I cried. Not from grief, or not only from grief, from something closer to recognition. The world was still very large. I had been living in a very small piece of it. I took photographs. Hundreds of them. Not because I knew what I was doing. I had brought a second-hand camera and a library book about composition, but because looking through a lens forced me to slow down and actually see what was in front of me. On the third day, I went on a boat tour. There were 11 of us, and at one point a humpback whale surfaced perhaps 40 meters off the port side and hung there for a long moment, before sounding again. Everyone gasped. An older man beside me said very softly, "There you are," as if he'd been waiting. I understood that feeling exactly. Noelle called twice while I was away. The first time I was on a trail and didn't have signal. The second time I was at dinner and saw her name and, for the first time in my life, let it ring. I called her back the next morning. "How's the trip?" she asked. "It's beautiful." I meant it completely. I wish I'd come years ago. A pause. I'm glad you're having a good time. Something in her voice was different, softer, maybe, less efficient. Ren sent me a voice message, she said. She said you two have been talking a lot. We have. She thinks a lot of you. The feeling is very mutual. Another pause. Then Noelle said something I didn't expect. Mom, I'm sorry about your birthday last year and the year before. I know saying sorry doesn't. I know it's not enough. I sat with that for a moment. It's a start, I said honestly. We didn't resolve everything on that call. We weren't meant to. Some things take longer than a phone call. But she sounded like herself. Like the person she had been before her life got so full and so fast and so far away from Sudbury. I held on to that. When I came home, the lilacs had finished blooming and the peonies were starting. I unloaded the green suitcase and hung the photographs I'd had printed from the trip. 3 of them, the whale, the highlands at dusk, and one of the lighthouse at Neal's Harbor that had come out better than I'd expected. 3 weeks later, I sat in Rachel Omatosho's office with the revised documents in front of me. Rachel slid them across the desk. Any final changes? I read through the pages one more time. The cottage would not go to Noelle outright. Instead, it would pass into a trust, managed for Ren until she was 30, to use as she wished. Sell it, keep it, share it, whatever she decided. The trust documentation named Rachel as executor and Bernard Quigley as financial advisor, which meant it would be handled properly. The private investment account would fund a scholarship at Laurentian University, in Kenneth's name, for students in financial need pursuing fine arts or environmental science, both things he'd cared about enormously. A portion was reserved for my own use, travel, the class, whatever came next. It was not a small amount, and Noelle would receive something. The contents of the house, certain keepsakes, a meaningful sum that acknowledged she was my daughter, and that the years had held real love as well as real disappointment. She was not cut out. She was simply not the center of a story she had assumed would be written around her. I signed each page. When I finished, Rachel looked at me. How do you feel? Honest, I said, and then, because it was true, Kenneth would approve. She smiled. I believe he would. Noelle came to Sudbury in July. Not with Dennis, just Noelle. She said she wanted to see me properly, just the 2 of us, which had not happened in longer than either of us wanted to admit. She arrived on a Friday evening with a bottle of Ontario Riesling, and a slightly nervous look, like someone arriving for a conversation they had been rehearsing. We sat on the back porch. The garden was at its best in July. Kenneth had planted the rosebed along the fence 20 years ago, and it had only gotten better with age. For a while we talked about easy things, but Noelle had not driven 8 hours for easy things. I've been thinking a lot, she said eventually over the second glass. About Christmas. About the cottage, about all of it. I waited. Dennis and I talk about money a lot, she said, choosing her words carefully. We have a lot of expenses, the house, the renovations, and I think somewhere I started seeing your situation as part of a plan. Our plan. She said it plainly, which I respected. I know, I said. It wasn't intentional, I don't think. I know that too. She turned her glass in her hands. I forgot your birthday because I was busy. Because I let myself be busy. And I think part of me figured that you'd be there, that you'd always be there, that you were. She stopped. Permanent, I said quietly. Her eyes filled. Yeah. The garden was very still. A robin landed on the rosebed fence and then was gone. I've been the same, I said, in a different way. I made myself so predictable, so manageable, that you stopped having to think about me. I taught you that I wasn't something to worry about. I paused. That was my mistake, too. Noelle wiped her eyes. She had her father's eyes. I had always loved that. I don't want to do this wrong, she said. With us. I don't want to keep doing it wrong. Then we'll figure out how to do it right. It wasn't a resolution. It was a beginning, the kind that requires work and time and more honesty than either of us had been accustomed to. But it was real. I felt it the way you feel solid ground after a long stretch of ice. When she left on Sunday, she hugged me at the door for a long time. Not the quick, efficient hug from December. A real one. I love you, Mom. I love you too. She drove away down the street, and I stood on the porch and watched until her car turned the corner. Then I went inside and made tea, and I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat alone with an unlit candle 8 months ago. And I thought about what Kenneth had said. Don't stand near the door anymore. I wasn't. In August, Ren came to visit. She took the bus from Toronto, which took an implausible number of hours, and arrived at the station with a large backpack and a camera around her neck and the expression of someone who had just had a very long adventure and was pleased about it. We drove out to the cottage. I hadn't been since the spring. The dock was in good shape. The lake was warm enough to swim, which Ren did immediately, coming up gasping and laughing. We spent 3 days there. We cooked simple meals and took the canoe out in the morning, and she showed me things about her camera that I didn't know. And I showed her things about watercolor that she found unexpectedly interesting. We talked about Dalhousie and Nova Scotia and what she wanted to study and what she was afraid of and what she hoped for. On the last evening, she sat at the end of the dock watching the light go gold on the water. And she said, "This place is really special, Grandma." "I know. I'm glad it's still ours." I looked at her, 17 years old and already so much herself, so clear, and I felt an enormous gratitude, not for the lake or the dock or the property, for the fact that love, actual love, could outlast almost anything if you let it. "It'll always be yours," I said, in one way or another. She looked at me, curious, but I just smiled and she let it be. On my 64th birthday in November, my phone rang at 12 minutes past 8 in the morning. I was still in my housecoat with my first cup of tea. It was Noelle. "Happy birthday, Mom." Her voice was warm, awake, entirely present. I sat down at the kitchen table. "Thank you, sweetheart. I set 4 reminders," she said. "Starting in October." I laughed. "Only 4? I'm building the habit." A pause. "I also booked flights. Ren and I are coming up the weekend after, if that's okay." Something moved through me that I couldn't quite name. Not relief, though it was related to relief. Something older and quieter. "That would be more than okay," I said. After we hung up, I sat for a while with my tea. The window showed the backyard, the rose bed, the birch tree Kenneth had planted the year Noelle was born. The sky was pale and cold and very clear. I had a watercolor class at 10. I had a call with Bernard Quigley at 2 to discuss the scholarship applications that had begun coming in. I had a letter to write to a young woman in Chelmsford who'd been awarded the first Kenneth Calder bursary. She was studying ecology, and her application essay had made me cry in the best possible way. I had a full day ahead of me. And for the first time in longer than I could honestly remember, I wasn't spending it waiting for someone else to decide it was worth having.